The outermost layer of connective tissue surrounding a skeletal muscle is the epithelium. Viagra is a drug used to treat erectile dysfunction by dilating arteries in the penis. The neurotransmitter that Viagra affects is the nitric oxide. The functional connection between a neuron and a skeletal muscle fiber is a synapse. The enzyme acetylcholinesterase causes acetylcholine to decompose. Which of the following neuralgia is not part of the CNS? Satellite cells. Smooth muscle has blank and not troponin. Calmodulin. 3 general functions of the nervous system are integrative, motor, and sensory. If a resting period becomes more negative, the membrane is hyperpolarized. Which cells produce myelin in the brain and spinal cord? Oligodendrocytes. The somatic nervous system controls voluntary actions, and the autonomic nervous system oversees involuntary actions. Correct. The functional connection between 2 neurons is a synapse. Compared to skeletal muscles, smooth muscle contracts more slowly and relaxes more slowly. The more movable end of a muscle is its insertion. Smooth muscle lacks transverse tubules and striations. Binding sites on the surface of actin allows the formation of cross bridges with molecules of myosin. A muscle that assists the agonist is A/An synergist. Creatine phosphate supplies energy for the synthesis of ATP. The muscle that adducts and flexes the arm is the coracobrachialis. The characteristic reddish-brown color of skeletal muscle comes from which substance? Myoglobin. If a neuron receives a series of stimuli whose effect is excitatory but subthreshold, the neuron is more excitable to incoming stimulation than before, is said to be facilitated. A sarcomere is best described as a unit within a muscle fiber. Which of the following is not true? Red fibers have fewer mitochondria than white. Which of the following cells is found only in the PNS? Schwann cell. A weightlifter uses muscles so the muscles exert more than 75% of their maximum tension. This stimulates muscle fibers, developing new filaments of actin and myosin. Neurons may have one axon and many dendrites. Neurotransmitters that are modified amino acids are dopamine, serotonin, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. A motor neuron and the muscle fibers that it controls constitute a motor unit. True. A toxin that causes botulism prevents release of acetylcholine. Enkephalins are neuropeptides. True. Drugs that decrease membrane permeability to sodium. All of the above. Short muscle cells with centrally located nuclei are smooth muscle fibers. A nerve is a single neuron that transmits impulses. False. Astrocytes structurally support neurons and also provide important signals and nutrients to neurons. True. Tawanda finishes a sprint and suffers great pain in her calf muscles. Her muscle cramps are most likely due to a temporary deficit of ATP. Which of the following is unique to neurons? Golgi apparatus. People with myasthenia gravis have a deficiency of acetylcholine receptors. A drug that functions as an agonist activates a receptor, helping a neurotransmitter bind or triggering an action potential in some other way. An excitatory postsynaptic potential lasts for about 15 milliseconds. Sensory receptors are part of the CNS. False. The functional unit of muscle contraction is the sarcomere. A neuromuscular junction, the muscle fiber membrane folds, forming a motor end plate. Saltatory conduction is faster than conduction of an unmyelinated fiber. An action potential is triggered if EPSPS overpower IPSPS. A plank position is part of a yoga/Pilates workout. The person supports the body on the floor in a prone position with the arms and feet supporting the body. It is a little like the up position of a push-up held for 30 to 60 seconds. Contraction of the abdominal muscles in a plank is most likely isometric. Marjorie takes an anti-anxiety drug so she can sleep better and remain calm enough to study effectively. She begins by taking 25 milligrams every evening, but within a month this dose is no longer helping, so she takes 2 pills. Another month, this dosage is no longer effective. This is happening because the number of receptors to which the drug binds on neurons has declined. The first event in a muscle fiber contraction is that acetylcholine is released from the end of the motor neuron. Activities such as distance swimming and distant running are most likely to stimulate the development of slow fatigue-resistant fibers. Clusters of neuron cell bodies in the PNS are called ganglia. Every neuron has a cell body. Sensory receptors. All of the above. Convergence refers to axons from neurons at different parts of the nervous system contracting the same neuron. Fibers of muscles whose motor neurons are severed may be replaced by fat or fibrous tissue. The brain and spinal cord comprise the central nervous system. True. The increase in the number of motor units activated as a result of more intense stimulation is called recruitment. When a nerve fiber is polarized, the concentration of Na plus is higher on the outside of the membrane and K plus is higher on the inside. An immune response that affects the myelin coating on axons throughout the spinal cord and brain, triggering inflammation and leaving scars, is multiple sclerosis. Interneurons are specialized to carry impulses from receptor cells into the brain or spinal cord. False. Transverse tubules and sacroplasmic reticulum are well developed in skeletal and cardiac muscle fibers. Several nerve fibers converging onto one neuron amplifies impulses. False. During the absolute refractory period, a stimulus of high intensity may trigger a nerve impulse. False. Neural stem cells can be harvested from autopsies and stored alive in banks, whereas neurons cannot, because neural stem cells have lower oxygen and energy requirements than neurons. The neurotransmitter that controls skeletal muscle contraction is acetylcholine. A stimulus great enough to change the membrane potential and propagate an action potential is said to have reached threshold. Rigor mortis affects skeletal muscles a few hours after death due to a decrease in ATP and increased permeability to calcium. The nervous system, all of the above. Endomysium separates individual muscle fibers from each other. True. Muscle atrophy that progresses with aging is caused by reduction in all of the above. Neurons that conduct impulses from the CNS to muscles or glands are motor neurons. Muscle fibers are basically a collection of sarcomeres. Blanks support the axon from within, neurofibrils. Diverging axons amplify an impulse by contacting many neurons. In the initiation of muscle fiber contraction, calcium ions bind to tropomyosin, exposing active sites on actin for the cross-bridge formation. False. In a recording of a muscle twitch, the delay between the time a stimulus is applied and the time the muscle responds is called the latent period. Neuroglia is specialized to react to environmental change, and neurons support neuralgia. False. Drugs that inhibit the enzyme monoamine oxidase allow increased activity of norepinephrine. In convergence, two or more incoming fibers contact a single neuron, whereas in divergence, impulses leave a neuron pass into several output fibers. True. The buccinator muscle is in the cheek. The enzyme ATPase occurs in the globular portion of myosin molecules. True. During muscle contraction, ATP supplies energy for myofilament movement. An example of a partial but sustained contraction is muscle tone. A reason that the axons in the CNS and PNS differ in their ability to regenerate after injury is that axons of the CNS lack neural lemma. Transverse tubules transmit muscle impulses into the cell interior. A nerve cell membrane becomes depolarized as a result of some ion channels being open while others are closed. Both acetylcholine and norepinephrine can affect smooth muscle contraction. Which of the following statements is correct? Actin filaments sag along myosin filaments. Both muscle function and mechanical devices called levers. The muscle that opposes a particular action is called the antagonist. Skeletal muscles help maintain body temperature in that the more active they are, the more heat is released. Action potentials are related to impulses conducting along an axon in that Propagation of a series of action potentials along a nerve cell fiber constitutes an impulse. Functions of muscles include all of the above. Dendrites on unipolar neurons are part of sensory neurons. When a muscle undergoes atrophy in response to disuse, all of the above. When ATP levels are low, the relationship between ATP and creatine phosphate is that creatine phosphate supplies energy to regenerate ATP and ADP and phosphate. Arrange the following steps of muscle fiber contraction in the correct sequence. 1. The muscle impulse reaches the sacroplasmic reticulum and calcium is released. 2. Thin filaments are pulled over the thick filaments. 3. Calcium flows the sacroplasm and binds to troponin molecules, leaving active sites. 4. The impulse arrives at the synapse and travels through the transverse tubules. 5. The muscle fiber shortens and contracts. 6. Myosin heads to bind to expose active sites of actin, forming cross bridges. 4, 1, 3, 6, 2, 5. Myelin is rich in lipids. The cytoplasmic extensions that, together with the cell body, provide the main receptive surfaces for neurons are dendrites. The space between neurons is called the neuronal space, fault. Migraines result from release of calcintonic gene-related peptide from the trigeminal nerves at the base of the brain in response to a spreading wave of excitation followed by lack of response from the cortex. Drugs that increase the actions of norepinephrine and or serotonin by keeping them in synapse longer are most likely used to treat clinical depression. The most rapid conduction of an impulse along an axon occurs on a fiber that is thick and myelinated. The amount of oxygen liver cells required to support the conversion of lactic acid to produce glucose or glycogen is the oxygen debt. Threshold stimulus is the minimum strength of stimulation required to contract a muscle fiber. A mixed nerve includes different neuroglial cells, faults. In reuptake, a neurotransmitter that has already been released in the synaptic cleft is taken back into a synaptic knob of the presynaptic neuron into nearby neuroglia or neurons. When an action potential passes over the surface of a synaptic knob, the contents of fascicles are released in response to the presence of calcium ions. Which of the following molecules is responsible for a runner's high, a good feeling that accompanies long-distance running? Beta endorphin. What is the correct sequence of events along an axon that follows a membrane reaching threshold potential? 1. The membrane depolarizes. 2. Sodium channels open and sodium ions diffuse inward. 3. The membrane repolarizes. 4. Potassium channels open and potassium ions diffuse outward. 2, 1, 4, 3. Masses of myelinated nerve fibers appear white. A sign of aging of the muscular system is decreased supplies of myoglobin to muscles. A tendon is blank, whereas an aponeurosis is blank. Cord-like, it connects muscles to bones, a broad sheet of dense connective tissue that connects muscles to muscles. Myofibrils are composed primarily of actin and myosin. A myogram is a recording of the event of a twitch. Synaptic knobs are at the end of axons. The type of muscle cell that lacks transverse tubules have a single nucleus and is under involuntary control is smooth muscle. Cardiac muscle, all of the above. Presynaptic neurons release neurotransmitters by blank. Exocytosis. Which of the following is/are a type of neuralgia? All of the above. The muscle that causes an action is the agonist. Opiate drugs derived from poppies relieve pain in humans because the human nervous system has receptors for endogenous opiates. Athletes usually experience muscle fatigue less quickly than non-athletes because they produce less lactic acid. Transmitting an impulse from one neuron to another involves a/an impulse stimulating a presynaptic axon to release a neurotransmitter into a synaptic cleft. A motor unit is a motor neuron and the muscle fibers connected to it. The discoloration and swelling of a muscle strain is due to ruptured blood vessels. Axon branches are called collaterals. True. Acetylcholine released by the myofibril crosses the synaptic cleft to bind to the motor neuron ending. False. Myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune disorder. Blank degrades acetylcholine, keeping it from accumulating in the synapse. Acetylcholine esterase. A muscle fiber exposed to a series of stimuli increasing frequency combines individual twitches, summation, which results in complete sustained contraction. Oxygen debt in muscles may develop because of the inability of respiratory and circulatory systems to supply enough oxygen to skeletal muscles when used strenuously for a minute or two. Which of the following ions cross neuron cell membranes more readily? Potassium. Most of the neurons in the brain and spinal cord are multipolar. Each neuron in the CNS may receive input from thousands of axons. At a neuromuscular junction, neurotransmitters are released. Nodes of Ranvier line between two neurons. False. Regina began an exercise program 6 months ago, and the muscles of her upper limbs and lower limbs are more prominent. Exercise can lead to formation of new muscle by stimulating skeletal muscles to release IL-6, which stimulates satellite cells to divide, producing more muscle cells. The types of neurons that are organized into neuronal pools are interneurons. A shift in metabolism that breaks down pyruvic acid to lactic acid is called lactic acid threshold. The neurotransmitter most likely produced when a person uses a drug that creates a sense of well-being is dopamine. The two types of cells of the nervous system are motor neurons and sensory neurons. Because the response of nerve fiber is all or nothing, a greater intensity of stimulus does not produce stronger impulse. True. Myelin is composed largely of carbohydrates. False. ATP is necessary for muscle relaxation. True. The striated appearance of skeletal muscle fibers results from the sarcomere organization. Neurotransmitters are stored in vessels in motor neuron endings. A myelinated nerve fiber is blank, whereas an unmyelinated nerve fiber is blank. White encomposing the white matter of the brain and spinal cord, gray encomposing the gray matter of the brain and spinal cord. Myelin consists of layers of lipids and proteins that wrap around an axon. In order for a severed peripheral nerve to regenerate and recover its original function, nerve fibers must sprout and enter tubes formed by basement membranes and connective tissue. The structures that connect cardiac muscle cells are intercalated